The Meadow Valley Wash project for the Lincoln County Archaeological Initiative was originally conceived as a way of showing how natural systems can affect cultural distributions. So what I mean by that is archaeological sites are not always preserved because of flash floods, because of natural events. And sometimes archaeologists make the mistake of interpreting an absence of sites as a cultural choice. So we really wanted to look at what is natural and what is cultural in the Meadow Valley Wash Drainage Basin in order to help build better interpretations.
Well, as a geoarchaeologist, I really am sort of an interpreter between geologist and geomorphologist and archaeologist. Geology is really useful for archaeology, which is the study of past peoples, because we need to understand where the water was in these desert systems in order to understand where people were. So in these deserts, people were always drawn to water. Well, the sediments, especially in these wash systems, can sometimes be pretty volatile. So one of the major questions for this project is to see what the age of the actual surfaces are, because when we look for archaeology, a lot of times we're walking across the landscape, and if we don't see any artifacts, we assume people weren't there. But that's a bad assumption, and that's why we use the geomorphology, is if the surface is very young, the artifacts might be buried, or maybe the artifacts were wiped away. So we're not seeing the cultural, decisions by people. We're seeing the decision, or what the geomorphic system is saying. So the cycles of erosion and deposition is what we're seeing. We're not seeing the history of people in the area. So this core only represents 1,000 years, but people have been in the area at least 13,000 years. So you can imagine this is only a small window, and we need some really big windows in multiple locations in order to understand how people interacted with this system. Anybody who's ever seen a flash flood can understand what kind of impact that's going to be on their decisions on where to camp, and whether the evidence that they left behind is going to be destroyed or preserved.
So if you're talking about the energy that was involved in creating these different landforms and depositing different types of sediments, that energy is widely variable, and it's episodic. You can have a flash flood that's coming down one of the tributary canyons, and it deposits an alluvial fan that blocks the main Meadow Valley Wash channel. And then you might have water ponding behind that blockage, and you have some sort of wetland that's forming where it's relatively quiet water deposition, and fine-grained sediments are accumulating in that low-energy system. But then, 100 years later, maybe more, you have a very large flood coming down the main Meadow Valley Wash, and it blows out that alluvial fan dam and scours all of those fine-grained, quiet water sediments, and in its place, on top of them, puts down some coarse gravel that tells you that was a high-energy event. And so the energetics commonly come down to how big are the particles that were moved in any given event, whether it was stream flow or alluvial fan deposition or hill slope raveling, and how are those particles arranged into a sedimentary package. And so that information is decipherable. You can't exactly say when it happened, but with radiocarbon dating of specific types of sediments, you can kind of get an approximate time.
And we can also use the artifacts. So the temporally diagnostic artifacts that are on a specific landform can help us give a minimum age of that landform. So the archaeology distribution is both impacted by that natural geomorphic energy, but it also reflects it.
And what we have here is a sediment core that we took out of part of Meadow Valley Wash, an area called Spring Valley at Spring Valley State Park. It's up in the upper part of the watershed. And it is basically an archive of history told in muds from a small bog on the side of the drainage. So right here you have about 1,000 years of environmental history archived in mud. These little sections right here are samples that I took to analyze pollen that was deposited over the years from the surrounding region. Pollen in the atmosphere comes from a broad area around the sampling locality, and so you get a good general overview of what the vegetation was like at all of these little points in time.
So after Ken mapped the geomorphic landforms, we actually selected parcels on different ages and types of landforms to go out and do archaeological survey. Archaeological survey is when archaeologists walk 30-meter transect intervals. So we go out and do a grid. We walk a grid along the surface looking for artifacts, which is anything over 50 years old. And so we look for that evidence, and we then record it very precisely. And so we have good documentation of where archaeological sites are, what types of artifacts are represented or features. Features are things like houses or fire pits. And then we know where they're distributed on those landforms. And so that's how we arranged or organized this project by geomorphic landforms so that we could analyze how landform type and age affects archaeological artifact and feature distribution. It's really interesting to know how people have adapted to climate change in the past. And one thing I'm really interested in is knowing those environmental transitions and how it affected cultures. So by understanding the cultures of people who are arguably the most complex of all species, it's really interesting. You never run out of questions because if it's not about the environment, what kind of cultural systems are in place? Are family systems changing? Are group sizes changing? So it's a never-ending series of questions that you can address with archaeology.